All right, today is our second day on our pop art portraits. You are going to finish tracing everything with a Sharpie and make sure that some of these lines you get nice and thick. That was one of the traits that Roy Lichtenstein used, is having those edges and those lines that he used to outline some of his shapes really, really thick. Sometimes we can even cover up mistakes or like kind of adjust lines to make them a little bit thicker. As you're using your Sharpie, make sure your messy mat is underneath your paper. These papers are not as thick as normal papers, so we want to keep our messy mat from getting Sharpie all over our table. Make sure you get those lines. Sometimes I even add extra lines just to kind of create that feeling of a hair direction. I don't really like this line here, so I'm going to try to hide that. If I had done this with pencil, I probably would have erased this straight line. Maybe I can just kind of get that covered up with my Sharpie in different ways. I also have my word. Now, if you've already drawn your word and traced it, that's great. Double check that you have those lines nice and thick. And on our video that we watched of creating these 3D letters, we create like an extra thick line on one side. You can keep making that nice and thick to make that really stand out on one side of your letter. Go slowly so that you get really clean edges. This takes a little bit of time, but you don't have to color in everything. When you're doing this, some of these areas you can still leave white. So once you've got your Sharpie done, and that'll take a lot of the day today, you can get some markers, and we're just going to use these regular markers, and you can start filling in your face. Now if you want to just use a regular face color, you can, depending on what your color of your face is. If you want to do something different and you want to use maybe a purple color for your hair or your face, maybe you don't want to have a regular looking face, you can. Go slowly though. Sometimes with markers, if we go too fast, they look kind of dried out and not very nice. So go slowly. If you'd like to do Ben-Day dots on your face, you can. That's what I did on some of mine. I do want you to have Ben-Day dots somewhere. So somewhere on your picture needs to have Ben-Day dots. And again, Ben-Day dots are not, they are very slow, very in control. You can make them big like that. If you want to make them small, you can make them small. Double check that you have a nice marker. If the marker's dried out, get a different one. Dried out markers do not look very good. And that Ben-Day dots, they just give it this interesting texture. Some people would, like if I colored in this tea yellow first, I could do the red on top of it, or I can even do black Ben-Day dots on top of it. That adds another little texture and design to it. So like on this one, I colored this in yellow and then I decided to do Ben-Day dots here. My face, I did mostly Ben-Day dots. I did a few black Ben-Day dots here. I think on this one I did mostly Ben-Day dots on my face. It took a little bit longer, but it looks really, really nice. And just make sure that you get that black really, really solid first before you start with the Ben-Day dots. And then we will work on these today and next week.